Montana Territory, 1878. Snow still clung to the mountain shadows when they took her daughter. Zadie Zimmerman had been hauling firewood behind her cabin when the riders came. 3 men, rough-looking, with stiff mouths and hard eyes. She saw them coming and tried to run, but it was too late. They did not bother hurting her. Just shoved her to the ground and took 6-year-old Winnie from inside the cabin. No explanation, no mercy. The tallest one said, spitting into the dirt. Your husband left a debt. Consider the girl Collateral. Zadie screamed until her throat bled, but the riders were already gone, kicking up snow and dirt as they disappeared into the pines. Her legs gave out in the doorway. She curled her fingers into the frozen earth and whispered her daughter's name until the wind swallowed it. By sunset, she had gathered what little she could: blanket, rifle, dried venison, and left the cabin behind. She did not know where they had gone, but she knew no one was coming to help. Her husband had died 2 winters ago, buried somewhere near Fort Benton. The debt he left behind had caught up with them. She followed tracks until the snow made them disappear. Days passed. Her boots cracked. Her hands bled. Still, she kept walking. It was late afternoon on the 4th day when the cowboy found her. He rode up slowly, a tall man on a roan gelding, the kind of man who looked like he had seen too much and said too little. He wore a battered hat, a coat patched at the elbows, and a revolver that looked like it had been used more than once. His name was Rhett Holloway. She had collapsed by the edge of a frozen creek, too cold and too tired to cry anymore. She looked up at him, eyes narrowed with suspicion, fingers curled around the rifle in her lap. I do not need your help, she rasped. Rhett dismounted anyway. You were shaking so bad. Your rifle is pointing at the sky. He knelt beside her, unrolled his blanket, and without asking, wrapped it around her shoulders. She tried to argue. He ignored her. Where are you headed? He asked, settling beside her. They took my daughter. 3 men. Said my husband owed them. I am getting her back. Rhett looked at her like she had just told him the sky was falling. On foot. I will crawl if I have to. He did not laugh. He nodded once, slow and sure. Then I reckon I am going with you. Zadie blinked. Why would you do that? He shrugged. Got nowhere to be. And I do not much like men who steal children. She wanted to argue again, but her body gave out before her words could. She woke hours later in the shelter of a small lean-to he had built with pine boughs and canvas. A fire crackled beside her. Rhett sat across from it, sharpening a knife with long, patient strokes. You should not have helped me, she mumbled. He looked up. You are welcome. I do not have anything to offer. I did not ask for anything. She watched him a long moment, trying to make sense of him. Where are you from? She asked. Grew up near Abilene. Left when I was 16. Been riding ever since. Ever have a family? Had a brother. He died in Kansas. After that, I just kept going. She pulled the blanket tighter. You do not talk much. I talk enough. The next morning, they rode double on his horse. Zadie gave him what little she remembered. One man had a scar down his neck. Another wore a red scarf. She thought they might be heading toward Helena or maybe Deer Lodge, where men with debts like to disappear in the mining camps. They rode hard, stopping only when the horse needed rest. Rhett never complained. He kept watch while she slept, hunted rabbit when their food ran low. Zadie did not trust him yet, but she trusted the way he watched the trail. The way he never looked at her with pity, only purpose. On the 3rd night, they made camp beside a river. Zadie sat with her knees tucked to her chest, staring into the fire. I was not always this weak, she said quietly. You are not weak, Rhett said. I could not stop them. You are still riding after them. That is more than most would do. She looked at him. Why are you really helping me? He tossed another branch into the fire. Because someone has to. She did not know what made her do it, maybe the way his voice sounded, low and certain, but she leaned over and kissed his cheek. Just once. Just long enough to feel the warmth of his skin. He looked at her, surprised but not startled. I have not kissed anyone since before Winnie was born, she said. Rhett nodded. You can kiss me again if you want. She did not. Not yet. But she smiled for the first time in days. They reached Deer Lodge by the end of the week. It was a rough town, full of miners and gamblers and the kind of men who did not ask questions. Rhett stabled the horse and walked beside Zadie, his hand never far from his revolver. At a saloon near the edge of town, they found a man with a red scarf playing cards. Zadie stopped cold. Her breath caught. That is him, she whispered. Rhett stepped forward without hesitation. He walked straight to the table, grabbed the man by the collar, and slammed him against the wall. Where is the girl? He demanded. The man sputtered. What girl? Rhett pressed the barrel of his revolver into the man's chin. 6 years old. Brown hair. You took her from a cabin near the Beartooths. The room went silent. She is alive, the man gasped. Scar took her south. Said he knew a buyer in Bannack. Zadie's stomach turned. A buyer? She is not sold, Rhett said, voice hard. We will get her back. They left town that night. Rhett stole a second horse for Zadie quietly, cleanly, and they rode south. Zadie did not sleep that night. She could not. Not with the thought of her daughter in the hands of men who thought she was worth a few dollars. Rhett rode beside her, always close, always steady. You are not alone in this, he said once, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked at him. I know. It was not love yet, but it was something close. Something steady. Something that felt like the beginning of a life she had not dared to hope for. And she would follow it just like she would follow him until it led her back to her daughter. The wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke as they left Deer Lodge behind, riding south beneath a sky thick with ash-colored clouds. Rhett had taken the lead, guiding them along a narrow trail that wove through granite hills and blackened cottonwoods. Zadie rode close behind, her shoulders hunched into a wool coat a size too large, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. Neither spoke much, the urgency between them needing no words. By the second day, the land began to change. The pines thinned, giving way to sagebrush and dry grass that clung to the slopes like old wounds. The trail grew steeper. At times, Zadie had to dismount and lead her horse by the reins, her boots slipping over loose rock. You been to Bannack before? She asked late that afternoon, her breath fogging in the cold air. Once, Rhett said. Rode herd for a man who lost most of his cattle gambling there. Place don't care much for laws. She nodded slowly, wiping her brow with the back of her sleeve. Sounds like the kind of town men like Scar would crawl to. He'll be expecting no one to follow him. She stared at the horizon, the sun just starting to touch the ridgeline. He's wrong. They camped that night near a narrow stream, its banks crusted with frost. Rhett gathered stones to circle the fire while Zadie fetched water, her fingers stiff from cold by the time she returned. He set a pan of beans on the flames, stirring them with the blade of his knife. She sat down beside him, stretching her legs toward the warmth. How did you learn to track like that? Spent 5 winters with a scout out near the Cimarron Strip. He taught me most of what I know. Man could read footprints like a newspaper. You trust people easy? Rhett looked up at her, eyes quiet. Not easy, but I trust you. She turned toward the fire, blinking hard. I keep thinking about what she's wearing. That little blue dress with the torn hem, the one she wouldn't let me fix. Rhett didn't speak right away. The firelight flickered in his eyes. You hold on to that. Details keep you steady when everything else slips. Her throat tightened. What if she's scared? She's got your blood. She won't break. They didn't talk after that. The silence stretched between them, not empty, but full of the things neither knew how to say. When she laid down for the night, Rhett stayed up, his rifle laid across his lap, his gaze fixed on the dark beyond the firelight. By dawn, the wind had shifted. A storm was near. Rhett pointed to the sky as they packed up. We'll lose light early today, he said. We need to climb the pass before it hits. Zadie adjusted the saddle cinch, checking the pack. You think Scar's already in Bannack? If he's moving fast, he could be. But men like him get comfortable easy. Spend too long in a saloon. Start thinking they're untouchable. As they rode, she studied Rhett's back, the way his coat clung to his shoulders, the steady rhythm of his hands on the reins. He didn't speak unless it mattered. He didn't ask questions that didn't need answering. And still, he was there. Always there. By midday, they crested the ridge. Below, Bannack stretched along the gulch like a wound-weathered storefronts. A leaning church, a cluster of tents near the creek where miners panned for what little gold hadn't already been taken. Smoke curled from chimneys. A pack of dogs roamed near a livery stable. Zadie pulled her horse to a stop beside Rhett's. How do we find her? I'll start at the stables. Men running girls usually keep them close to where they sleep. You check the mercantile. Ask about a man with a scar on his neck. She gripped the saddle horn, her knuckles pale against the leather. If you see her, I'll come for you. His voice was low but certain. No matter what. They split at the edge of town, the horses' hooves muffled by the dust. Zadie walked into the mercantile with her jaw tight and her eyes sharper than they had been in weeks. The shopkeeper barely looked up from his ledger. She asked her question plainly. I'm looking for a man with a scar on his neck. Has a child with him. The shopkeeper blinked, then scratched the side of his face. Could be the feller staying above the old assay office. Been there since Tuesday. Keeps to himself. Bought a sack of apples and 2 blankets. Did you see the girl? He hesitated. Might have. Small thing. Didn't speak. She thanked him and stepped out just as Rhett rounded the corner, his mouth set in a grim line. Found the horse he rode in on, he said. Tied behind the assay office. Looks like we've got the right place. They moved fast, circling to the back. The building leaned against the hill, its rear windows boarded unevenly. Rhett tested the door with one hand and glanced at her. You ready? No, she said, lifting her chin. But I'm going anyway. He pushed the door open. Inside, it was dim and stank of whiskey. A man sat slumped in a chair near the stove, snoring through his mouth. In the far corner, a blanket shifted. Zadie stepped forward. Winnie, a small head lifted, eyes wide. Then the blanket fell away, and the girl ran, arms outstretched. Mama! Zadie caught her, dropping to her knees. She held her so hard she thought she might never let go. Rhett stepped over the sleeping man, kicked his rifle away, and put his back to the door. You all right? He asked over his shoulder. Zadie buried her face in her daughter's hair. I've got her. I've got her. They left town before dusk, no one trying to stop them. Scar never woke. Rhett said nothing about it, and she didn't ask. That night, they camped beside a dry creek bed. Winnie curled up between them, already asleep. Rhett sat beside the fire, his gaze on the stars. Zadie leaned into him, her hand brushing his. You didn't have to come with me. I know. She looked at him, really looked. But I'm glad you did. He wrapped her fingers in his, slow and deliberate. Me too. And for the first time since the cabin, her heart didn't feel like it was splintering. Felt like something whole. Something beginning. The snow came heavy 2 days out from Bannack. They'd followed the old toll road south, where the earth dipped into wide valleys and the sky pressed close. Cold had settled hard, and the clouds dragged low, thick with the kind of storm that could swallow a trail whole. Rhett pulled the oilskin tighter around his shoulders and kept the horses moving. Zadie just behind him. Her arms wrapped around Winnie where the girl sat bundled against her chest in the saddle. Storm's turning west, Rhett said, his voice raised just enough to carry. We'll need shelter before nightfall. Zadie didn't answer. Her face was drawn, eyes fixed ahead, but her arms never loosened around her daughter. She hadn't let go of her once since Bannack. Not to sleep, not to eat. Rhett hadn't asked her to. A half-collapsed line shack appeared just before dusk. The roof sagged in the middle and the chimney leaned like a drunk, but the walls were whole. Rhett led them in, tied the horses in the lee of the building, and set about laying a fire while Zadie rubbed warmth back into Winnie's hands. Inside, the air was musty with mouse droppings and old timber, but it was dry. Rhett crouched near the hearth, coaxing flame from flint, until the kindling caught and the fire threw a weak glow across the floorboards. Winnie lay curled in the corner, already asleep beneath Zadie's coat. Zadie sat beside her, one hand resting on the girl's back, the other wrapped around her own ribs like something inside her still ached too deep to name. Rhett sat on the other side of the fire, his legs stretched out, rifle close. He watched Zadie quietly, the firelight drawing lines beneath his eyes. "You ever think about going back east?" she asked after a long silence. "No," he said. I did once. Thought maybe I'd take Winnie to Kansas City. There's a woman there, knew my mother. Runs a boarding house. But it was just talk. I wouldn't know how to live in a place where trees line the street and folks wear gloves to supper." Rhett gave a low sound that might have been agreement. "I tried Cheyenne once. Took a job driving freight. Didn't last. Streets were too loud. Couldn't sleep with all that clatter." She shifted, pulling her knees up beneath her dress. "Funny, isn't it? The way noise can feel heavier than silence." He looked at her across the fire. "You sleep better now?" "Better than I did. Still wake sometimes thinking I hear hooves. Or her crying." She glanced toward Winnie. "But she's here. And that's more than I thought I'd get." The fire cracked. Rhett tossed in another stick and let the silence stretch. Zadie's voice came softer then. "You gonna keep riding after this?" "Hadn't thought past the next camp," he said. She looked at him. "Maybe you should." He didn't answer right away. Just watched the flame rise and fall between them. "You asking me to stay?" he said finally. "I'm saying I wouldn't want to do this alone again." Night deepened. The wind rattled the shutters, but inside, the cabin held steady. Zadie shifted closer, her shoulder brushing his. He didn't move away. "You ever think about settling?" she asked. "Sometimes. Doesn't seem like a thing I'd be good at." "You're good at what matters." His hand found hers, rough and warm against her fingers. He didn't squeeze, just held. They sat like that until the fire burned low and the wind softened. In the morning, the snow had stopped. A pale sun lit the mountains and the world outside the shack glistened like glass. Rhett saddled the horses while Zadie fed Winnie a bit of bread and dried apple from her pack. He turned as Zadie stepped out, Winnie clinging to her skirt. "Where to now?" Zadie asked. "There's a ranch near Red Rock," Rhett said. "Belonged to a man I knew. He passed last spring, but his widow's still there. She's kind. Keeps to herself. Might be a place to stay if you're looking." "I'm not looking," Zadie said. "I've found it." He met her eyes, and something in his chest shifted. She wasn't just standing in front of him. She was choosing him. They rode south through the valley, the three of them, with no one chasing and no debts left to steal from them. The trail ahead was long, but it was theirs now. And it led home. The trail to Red Rock bent through a stand of narrow-leaf cottonwood, their trunks pale as bone against the snow-dusted plain. Rhett rode ahead, scanning the ridgelines, while Zadie kept Winnie steady in the saddle behind him, her small arms tucked around his waist. The girl was quiet but not withdrawn, her head turned often, watching birds lift from branches and the way the wind combed through the winter grass. They reached the ranch by midday. It squatted low in a hollow near a frozen creek, the house built of squared logs, the roof pinned under heavy stone. Smoke curled from the chimney and a pair of milk cows stood huddled beside a lean-to, their breaths rising in slow plumes. Rhett dismounted first and led them through the gate without a word. When he knocked, a woman opened the door, her hair streaked with gray and her dress patched at the hem. "Rhett Holloway," she said, folding her arms. "I thought you'd gone south with the cattle drives." "I turned north," he said. "Mabel, this is Zadie and her girl, Winnie. They need a place to land." The woman narrowed her eyes, studying them both in silence. Then she stepped aside. "There's stew on the stove. You can come in if you're quiet and don't bring trouble." Zadie nodded once, her voice low. We don't bring anything but ourselves. Inside, the house was warm with wood heat and the scent of rosemary. A single room stretched wide, with a stove tucked in the corner and a ladder leading to a loft under the rafters. Mabel handed Zadie a bowl and passed a smaller one to Winnie, who took it with both hands and sat on the floor without prompting. "You married?" Mabel asked, not unkindly. "No," Zadie said. "Not anymore." "Good," the woman muttered, ladling broth into a tin cup. "I don't trust men who leave." That night they slept in the loft, Rhett on one side, Zadie and Winnie on the other. The wind shifted outside, brushing the eaves with snow. Zadie lay awake long after the girl had fallen asleep, listening to Rhett's breathing on the far side of the room. "Did you know Mabel before her husband died?" she whispered. He stirred slightly. "I helped him build the barn. He was better with horses than people." "She doesn't say much." "She meant it when she said she didn't want trouble." Zadie shifted onto her back, staring up at the beams overhead. "Do you think we'll be safe here?" "For a while," he said. "Long as no one comes looking." "You think they will?" "No," he said. "But I don't trust quiet too long." She turned toward him, the darkness between them feeling thinner than the boards dividing the loft. "You ever think about buying land?" "I've thought about it," he said. "Never had the means to make it real." "What if you did?" He didn't answer right away. "Then depends who I'd be building it with." The next morning, Mabel handed Zadie a bucket and gestured toward the henhouse without ceremony. "They won't feed themselves." Zadie took the bucket and stepped outside, her breath fogging in the crisp air. She moved slowly, unsure of her place, but the rhythm came back to her. Feed, water, gather. She found 3 eggs under the farthest roost, still warm beneath the straw. When she returned, Mabel was kneeling beside Winnie, showing her how to shape dough into small biscuits. "She listens well," Mabel said without looking up. "She's always been careful with her hands," Zadie said. "Even as a baby. Careful hands grow into steady ones. You'd do right to keep her near." Rhett spent the day repairing a fence that had split under the last windstorm. Zadie watched him from the porch, his sleeves rolled, his back bent over the post hole. He worked with a quiet focus, his hands moving like he knew the shape of the earth already. That night, as Winnie slept against her lap, Zadie spoke to him across the fire. "You ever think about what you want in 10 years? I used to think I'd be dead by now," he said. "I thought I'd be running a schoolhouse," she said. "When I was 16, I had a letter of recommendation from a circuit judge. Thought I'd teach reading to children who'd never seen a book." "You still could." She looked down at Winnie's sleeping face. "Maybe. I think I'd like a garden. Chickens. A place where we don't have to move again." Rhett ran a hand over his jaw. "There's land near the river, west of here. Old cattle lease, but it's lying fallow. If a person had seed and time, they could make something of it." "Would you go with me?" she asked. He looked at her fully then, eyes steady. "I would." Zadie didn't move, didn't speak. She just reached out and he took her hand without hesitation. Outside, the wind had calmed. The sky was clear. And inside, the fire burned low and steady like something that meant to last. The land west of Red Rock sloped wide and open, with willows rising along the creeks and the mountains standing far off, quiet sentries in blue and silver. The lease had been left idle since spring, but the soil was dark beneath the frost and the fence posts still stood, though the wire sagged in places. Rhett rode the full perimeter with Zadie 2 days after the thaw began, their horses picking through patches of snow and brittle grass. "What do you think?" she asked, halting near a rise where the wind caught her braid and tugged at the hem of her skirt. He swung down from the saddle and studied the land. "Water's good. Enough trees up by the ridge for cutting. There's shelter and space enough for a garden, maybe a milk cow if we fence her proper." Zadie dismounted beside him. "I could build rows along that southern edge. Potatoes would take, if we can get seed in time. I've got a little money put aside. Not much, but we could get by." He turned toward her. "You sure this is what you want?" "It's not easy work. I know what it is," she said. "But it's ours if we make it so." They signed the lease from the county clerk in Dillon 2 days later, using the last of Rhett's trail money and the small bundle Zadie had hidden away in a tobacco tin since before winter. The man at the desk raised his brows when she signed her full name with a steady hand but said nothing. Outside, she tucked the copy into her coat pocket and looked up at Rhett. "I never thought I'd put my name to land again." He handed her the reins. "Now you have." They moved in early spring, after the last snows melted and the ground softened enough to dig. Mabel gave them a spare kettle and a flour sack half full, and Rhett hauled 2 wagon loads of scrap lumber from an abandoned corral near Glen Station. The first night on the land, they slept in the wagon bed, the 3 of them curled beneath every blanket they owned. The stars overhead blinked cold and clear. Winnie asked, "Will we stay here forever?" Zadie answered, "If we tend it well, we might." She built the cook fire the next morning while Rhett marked out the footprint for a house. It would be simple: 2 rooms, a loft, a lean-to kitchen, but it would be theirs. He drove the corner stakes by noon and started digging the foundation trench with a borrowed spade. Zadie worked beside him, sleeves pushed to her elbows, dirt under her nails. "You ever build a house before?" "Helped raise a church frame once outside Laramie," he said. "But this one'll stand longer." She smiled, brushing hair from her face. "Because it's built on stubbornness?" He paused, looking at her with something deeper. "Because it's built with you." By midsummer, the boards were up, the roof shingled with hand-cut pine, and the door hung on iron hinges Rhett had salvaged from an old barn. The walls held out the wind. The windows opened wide to the fields. Zadie planted beans and squash in the garden patch. Rhett fenced in a small pasture and traded his saddle rifle for a yearling calf. Winnie carried water from the creek and learned to split kindling with a hatchet she could barely lift. One evening, after the supper dishes were stacked and the air smelled of cut grass and ash, Zadie stood with Rhett outside the house, arms folded against the porch post. "I never thought I'd want this again," she said. "After all that came before." He leaned beside her, boots crossed at the heel. "You don't have to want it all at once. Just enough to keep going." She reached for his hand and laced her fingers through his. "I want it now. With you." He pressed a kiss to her temple, slow and sure. "Then we'll make a life here. You, me, and that girl who already runs faster than she listens." They married in late August, under a cottonwood near the creek. Mabel came, dressed in gray, and brought a jar of blackberry preserves as a gift. The man who kept the supply store in Red Rock read the vows from a borrowed family Bible. Winnie wore a ribbon in her hair and held the rings in her pocket until the moment came. Zadie's dress was plain muslin, her only adornment a strip of lace she'd saved from her mother's sewing basket. Rhett wore his cleanest shirt and a new pair of boots bought on credit. When the words were said and the vows made, the 3 of them stood together beneath the tree, the wind lifting the leaves like soft applause. That night, after the guests had gone and the sun had dropped behind the hills, Rhett lit the lantern in their room and turned toward her. "You sure?" he asked. Zadie stepped into his arms. "I've never been more." They kissed, then not with urgency, but with the quiet certainty of a life joined, of pain endured, and peace earned. Their hands knew the shape of one another's strength. Their breaths matched like steps on a shared road. Outside, the house stood firm in the dark, its windows aglow with steady light. The calf grew into a docile milk cow. The bean rows stretched taller than Winnie by late harvest. Rhett built a shed for tools, and Zadie taught Winnie her letters at the kitchen table. The girl learned quickly, her fingers neat on the page, her voice steady as she read aloud beside the hearth. Autumn came soft, with gold in the trees and smoke in the air. The wind turned cooler, but the house held warm. They gathered kindling, canned what they could, and laid quilts across the bed. One evening, Zadie watched Rhett rocking gently on the porch, a worn book in his lap and Winnie asleep inside. She stepped out beside him, wrapped in a shawl Mabel had woven the winter before. "You still think about the road?" she asked. He looked up at her, smile slow and full. "Sometimes, but I've got more reason to stay than I ever had to leave." She sat beside him, resting her head against his shoulder. They stayed long after the sun had gone. No words passed between them, only the soft creak of the rocker and the hush of wind through drying grass. The pain of the past remained, but it no longer ruled their days. It had become something quieter, a shadow behind them, not a weight they carried. What they had now was a home built from choice, from grit, from the slow bloom of trust where once there had only been survival. And every evening, as the fire burned low and the hush of night closed in, Zadie reached for Rhett's hand beneath the quilts, and he held it like something he'd never let go.